Welcome to the MVP Show. Full show notes for this episode can be found at nz365guy.com/323. Before we chat with today's guest, here's a quick message from our sponsors. Today's show is brought to you by the 90-Day Mentoring Challenge. This is the 5th year I've run this program to help turbocharge your Microsoft Business Application career. If you want to be mentored in the next 90-Day Mentoring Challenge, go to nz365guy.com/mentoring for more information. And with that, let's get on with the show. Today's guest is from Poland. He is working at 3Shape as a CRM architect. He got his MVP awarded February of this year. He loves dancing and coding. He is originally from Kiev, Ukraine. Check him out on Twitter at Dancing with CRM. Welcome to the show, Oleksandr Olashyn. I'm pretty sure I got that wrong. How do you pronounce your name?
Yeah, so it's Oleksandr Olashyn.
Olashyn. Awesome. So, wow, February this year, you became an MVP. How does it feel?
Yeah, honestly, it was kind of hard to believe. Like, it was a long journey till this point, and it was such an achievement for me. Like, always MVP was like almost rock stars for me, and becoming one of them is, really awesome.
Totally. So just let's get some context. You're from Ukraine, but you currently in Poland. Tell us about how that move came about.
So I'm working on a company called 3Shape, and they have offices both in Kiev, Ukraine, and in Poland, here in Szczecin. So they decided to relocate me and move me to Polish office, which there is also a long story that I initially needed to be here. So they hired me in Polish office, but because of some documents complications, it was postponed. So I started in Ukrainian office instead. And then I decided to finish my master's degree, and, everything else is history. So instead they decided to move me here.
Wow. So all your family's back in Kiev?
No, my parents are actually from a small town called Hust, and it's of the Hungary border. So it's like 30 kilometers from the border. And but in Kiev, I live since 2012. I obtained there my bachelor and master degree. So I moved there to pursue some knowledge in Kiev Polytechnic Institute.
So in moving to Poland, what's your favorite food that you found in Poland that you didn't have back in Ukraine?
Oh, that's a tricky question. We had a lot of similar food. Like, there are some Polish specifics. Wow. I genuinely cannot answer this question, honestly.
What's your go-to food then in Ukraine? As in, like, what is that traditional type dish that you're brought up with that's kind of like a favorite for you?
Oh, I obviously like borscht. Like, it's awesome, but also something from the traditional cuisine of my native town. It's called bograch, and it's also really famous in Hungary as well. So it's basically also a soup with meat, but with much more meat, and it's usually prepared under fire in this really big kettles. So it's really tasty. So if you ever will be in Transcarpathian region, I advise you to try it out.
Lovely. So you've become an MVP. Tell us about how, first of all, you got involved with Microsoft Business Applications. Did you start on the Dynamics side of things, or did you start more directly on the Power Platform?
So I started working with Dynamics back in 2016. It was actually my first full-time job. Like, before that, I got some things here and there as an internship or, as a part-time jobs as a software developer, but nothing actual. So Dynamics developer was my first full job in a company called Tech. And basically, I was a developer. I was working with 2015 version and then with 2016 and everything up from that.
And so one of the questions I've been getting a bit recently is, in fact, this actually, I just read it yesterday on Reddit, and somebody said, I'm a .NET C# developer, and I've been offered a job in Dynamics 365. Is it worth skilling up on Dynamics, for my career? What advice would you give them?
So I would say, if you are going to be a Dynamics developer, it's not fully, I would say not fully developer job. And what I mean by that, it not necessarily means that you will spend your all day coding. Like Dynamics and Power Platform is a low-code platform, right? So there is a lot of things that you will do and will configure without writing a single line of code. And for a lot of people, it might be a deal breaker. Like honestly, they want to spend their all day coding. They want to, sharp their skills. And I would say it's not the thing. Of course, you will code, and sometimes on project you will spend a lot of time coding, but it's not the main focus of the platform. So I would say if you want to code full time, like if code is all that you need, you shouldn't go on the Dynamics route. But if you want to explore business more closely, like understand how business processes work and maybe help to model them and do all kind of business related things, then Dynamics is your path to go.
Nice. For the time that you've been involved with Dynamics, what has changed in what you're doing? In other words, at the start, back in the day, you would have been writing plugins, workflow assemblies, those type of things. Tell us about what you did back then and what you do now that's kind of different. And I'm really wanting you to kind of address this from a developer point of view.
So at that point in time, I wrote a lot of code. As you mentioned, I wrote a lot of plugins, custom workflow activities. I wrote a lot of JavaScript code. I wrote a lot of console applications to perform specific migrations, because at the beginning of my journey, I wasn't aware that SSCS packages were a thing and KingsWaySoft existed, which would save me a lot of things and a lot of time. I also wrote, full-fledged Windows applications that were connected to Dynamics. And basically, in the beginning and back then, much more things, I would say, involved code-related things. So when I would say Power Automate, for example, became a thing, a lot of things like custom workflow activities weren't that necessary, because you can just embed that logic in the flow itself. And I would say we shifted a lot, like from using code-related approach to more low-code things. Like I would say business rules became more scalable, and overall platform became much more simplified in terms that you can do much more things without writing a single line of code. And then there was also Canvas applications that help us reduce, because before that we wrote like web resources and different type of things to perform various operations and show different things. But as soon as we could just embed Canvas app in the form, it became, completely change everything. And we could just create Canvas app and embed it in the form and make it do the thing without, writing too much overhead. Of course, there is still place for JavaScript. Not gonna lie. Currently, we also writing a lot of code, and sometimes even 1,000 lines of code, because some logic is just too complicated to be handled by business rules, and it's just fine. It's totally okay. And I think a lot of things become even easier, like introduction of execution context and form context. It bring a bit more streamlining, I would say, and new things that just introduced like this year, like a sync on save event, which would save a lot of things with more complicated logic validation from related trackers. It's also a great thing. But in general, I would say that I started to write less code over time. Of course, I'm writing PCF components, and for portals, there is also a big chunk of code that you need to write. But in general, I would say platform became much more friendly to business-oriented people.
Tell me, are you finding, are you still writing plugins at the same kind of volume that you were back then, or you're not writing plugins at all?
I genuinely almost stopped writing plugins. Like, we still have a bunch of CVA from the old times that we are using, and we still have fair amount of plugins that just, needed to be executed. But genuinely, I would say, yeah, we almost stopped writing plugins for the logic. Of course, sometimes it's obviously necessary, especially, with the synchronous things where flow isn't the same, but yeah.
What about web resources? Are you more using PCF rather than web resources?
Not really. So PCF is for UI. We can do a lot of things, but it cannot enforce the business logic. So do validation on different things and stuff. So I would say we are writing still a lot of JavaScript to enforce the business logic, and we do simplify a lot of things, but sometimes logic is just too complex, and it's still a big thing, especially in our company. But I do write a lot of PCF, mostly for myself, because I like to write the code, and sometimes I have any ideas, I just need to do them. Like today, I released a new PCF component to be able to change your toggles to something more interesting with the library called more toggles CSS. And
as in, so it's a visual. It allows you to visually change your toggles. Is that it?
Yeah, so basically you can replace the standard toggle with my component, and there's a bunch of CSS classes that you can just specify in the properties and completely change the look of your component. Like it can be iOS style, it can be Android, it can be material, whatever. There's like a list of components, just one component but multiple visual representations, which I really like.
You've been involved with PCF through its journey. What are the key things that you would talk about as into why to use PCF, and also what do you see the limitations of PCF as they stand at the moment?
So PCF is primarily like for UI purpose. So if you have some specific visualization or some logic that can be reused as a component that have some UI capabilities, then it's a good scenario for PCF. Like just what I said, like you want to have different toggles. That's a good variant for PCF. Or you want to present your dataset completely differently. That's a good variant for dataset. Or one of my first component was attachment gallery control to visualize nodes as a gallery to see those images. And it's also a good thing for PCF. But if you have just a business logic in general, then of course it's not a PCF. It shouldn't be PCF. It should be just a web resource. And for the current limitation, I would say one of the things is the performance. So especially if you're writing with React, because right now, and for some time already, all PCF components will load all dependency for themselves. So if you have like 5 components that use React, you will have 5 copies of React on your page. And especially if you write an unoptimized code or use heavy to load libraries, if you use a lot of components, that might impact the performance and loading time of the pages.
What do you think needs to improve still on PCF from Microsoft's side?
Well, the things that I wanted the most, and I think most of the people will agree, is like we are using the React, we are using the Fluent UI to make it look like a native control. So we are eagerly waiting for this performance improvement. So just one React, so we can have as many components as we can. I would say that would be the most waiting thing for all of us.
I like it. That's cool. Tell us about how you became an MVP.
So my journey to the MVP started 2 years ago, a bit more, with your program, with your 90 days mentoring challenge. That was my call to action, actually. So you said that we need to start blogging or sharing our knowledge in some way. So I decided to start my blog, Dancing with CRM, and share with people what I do, what I know, primarily coding. So in the beginning, it was PCF, because PCF was a hot topic back then. it just getting started, and I was interested in it. And I started writing about different PCF components I built, how to work with them, etc. But then I moved to a bit more like in general, like Azure functions and what you can use, just not dynamics in Power Platform, but a bit more, but how you can use these different things with it. And then for the last year and a half, even more, I was primarily focused on Power Apps portals because my latest projects were related to them, and I started writing a lot of things that I discovered and how it works, some tips and tricks, and deep dives onto new things that come to the Power Apps portals. And that's what I was speaking about on different conferences. So like Scottish Summit this year, I was talking about Power Apps portals and Web API, and how can you use it? What are benefits? What are downsides? Because I think right now a portal allow you to be, especially if you're interested in web development and front-end development, more flexible with the technology. Like you can use more code there and do much more complicated things. So that's what's kind of become interesting for me in recent years, I would say.
Has the MVP, getting the MVP in February this year, has it had any impact on your career?
Not yet, I would say. One thing that it did change is the amount of visitors of my website. That one grows significantly since I became an MVP. But rather than that, yeah, I don't think that, especially professionally, nothing changed.
Okay. What recommendation would you give to other people if they're considering that MVP might be something that would be of value to them in their career? What would your recommendations to them be?
So, just start sharing. It's not necessarily need to be blogs, because I know that it's hard to write. For me, it was really hard. I was never a person who writes things. I really like to explain. I really like to do gestures and stuff. But at the same time, it was hard for me to start writing. But, you just need to do it constantly, and you keep betting, but keep becoming better and better in it. But, if it's hard for you to blog, maybe try to record a video. Maybe that's your thing. Or just go to forums and answer questions. That's what I do. I become a Power Apps forum super user. And I'm answering questions on Portals forum because that's kind of my thing, and I'm sharing what I know. Because there's always people that just starting. There's always people that just come into this platform and they don't know things. They're reading docs, but it might become complicated. The platform still has a lot of legacy things that might not be understandable or easy to digest for the person who just started. And your knowledge and things that you can share because you were in the space for the time and you know it is really valuable for them. So it's never late to start, because there's always people who are starting as well with the platform, and you might help them.
I like it. Alex, that is fantastic advice. I always like to wrap up with some quick fire questions. Are you ready for yours?
Yep, sure.
Okay, what's the first concert you ever went to?
Oh, it was in Kiev. It was my current, it's my wife's favorite group called Melnica, and it was a rock concert.
Nice. In Kiev, in Ukraine, did you play Monopoly?
Oh, yeah, I did.
Yeah, so if you could choose any piece to be, which piece would you choose in Monopoly?
Oh, wow. Like what version of Monopoly we are talking about?
You know how they used to have those little
one.
tokens, and you could be a hat, or you could be a chair or a train or something like that. The little tokens that marked you as the player. Which one would you choose?
I always liked the car one. We had like a small red car, which was fancy.
Okay, the final question here, a bit random. Would you rather have no arms or no legs, and which would you choose?
Oh, no arms.
Wow.
Yes, I love to dance. I love to move. and being without my legs would be horrifying, honestly.
Wow, that is awesome. Alexander, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show. Listen, folks, if you get a chance, go check out his website. Thanks again for coming on.
It was awesome. Thank you for having me here.
Hey, thanks for listening. I'm your host, Business Application MVP, Mark Smith, otherwise known as the NZ365 Guy. If you enjoy the show and you want to support me in continuing to make the show, check out buymeacoffee.com/NZ365 Guy. Otherwise, stay safe out there and see you next time.